And I guess based on that, we'll, without further ado, let's get into the conversation. I'm going to start with Donna, and I'm going to ask, from your perspective, what is it that, how would you define digital overwhelm? And what do you think are the factors at play that are causing it to be a challenge for us in today's working life?
Gosh, I think it's because we're just so on 100% of the time, 100% on, even in our downtime. So we might go from being on a call like this and think, oh, I'll take a break before I dive into my work. And the first thing I'll do is I'll pick up my phone and have a look at more digital stuff. And so it's so pervasive into everything we do. And I was even reading this morning that there's been a study done around how it's even impacting people at home. So we think that digital overwhelm comes from just our work and our life, but I don't know how many of you subscribe to some version of TV viewing, and you might have Netflix, or you might have maybe you've got Foxtel, anyway, a whole bunch of subscriptions. And so I don't know whether you've ever sat there and churned all through your channels and gone, there's 600 channels here and I've got nothing to watch. That's another example of how it's impacting us. So nearly everywhere we look and everywhere we touch, we're exposed to some version of technology. And I would think, as we've all experienced the last couple of years, it's been even more. I can't tell you how many people are just saying to me right now, I just don't think and I get it. I get we're here on a Zoom today, so I do get that. And the irony is also not lost on me, Simon. And I'm just over Zoom. I'm starting now to revert back to phone calls for meetings a lot, because people just can't take being on camera all the time. So I think overall, I would say, if I was to sum up what it is, it's this notion that we are 100% on 100% of the time, and we've just got exposure to digital stuff. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't. This is new ways of working, and we haven't yet adjusted. I kind of think that the technology may have overtaken us in terms of our mental readiness or capability, whatever you want to call that. And so we feel more tired, we feel more overwhelmed, we feel more out of control because there's just so much stuff. Now, I've just seen a comment come up in the chat from Amanda A, and you're right. In our desire to create learning environments where people can choose their own adventure or cherry pick or just in time, we now have learning platforms that are a bit like Netflix, where there's so many channels that, we get a little overwhelmed for choice. And so that's another, that's not what would you say? That's not unique to digital. This idea of choice or decision fatigue is a well-known phenomenon. And I do think it comes into play with digital, but it's not just the domain of digital. So again, summarize, it's just being on all the time and never having a break from it, either self-selected or forced break from it.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing with all of that, when you talk about being able to find what you really need, I think it's different when you're looking through Netflix and you can't find anything to watch. We're looking for learning that you need and you can't find it. They're quite different, but similar problems that create that kind of overwhelm we all feel. I also think that your point about the fact that we are having to, through hybrid teams and the way we have to work, feel constantly on. And, even just today, the fact that we've got our video on, that's one form of having to be present. That's a different form than maybe we're used to having to do this much. And that does, after a day full of Zoom, I think I couldn't help but say it in the intro video that I put, that I was exhausted myself from being on Zooms all day and recording that video at the end of it. And so, it is really that situation where we are bombarded with digital content. We are also participating in it. And the idea that in our whole working lives, both, at work, as well as then when we sort of log off and try to relax, we're also engaging in digital there. It kind of adds up, doesn't it? And I guess,
and when do we switch off? So again, this is no judgment, so don't at me, no judgment. But how many of you sit, you log off in the evenings from your work and then you sit and watch telly and you scroll on your phones at the same time? Now, that's not a judgment to say, don't do it, but it's just, if you're doing it and we're experts in this field and we're trying to encourage and find pathways around digital overwhelm, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people that are just constantly on and constantly having stuff pushed to them. And, you know, I'm seeing a few comments here around even email. I mean, we used to think we had email overload 10 years ago, and now we've got 10 times the amount. And so it's just this being on. And I know from a learning and development perspective, this is, I don't have an answer for you. If I did, I'd be very rich if I had answers to this. But I do think it's something we need to think about. How do we create content, or we create learning experiences that help with that rather than contribute to it? And I think that's really a large part of what we're here to talk about today. And I'm very curious to hear about what people have to say about that. So
yeah, I mean, with your particular expertise in people's time management and how they do that, understanding there's this kind of drain on people's attention, what are some of the things you speak about when it comes to being able to prioritize what's important and, you know, and filter out the other stuff that isn't? Like, how do you talk about that within your books?
Look, there's a couple of things, but the one that comes to mind right now is the notion of our capacity and how much capacity we have and the type of capacity we have. And so most of us are operating on what I refer to, it's a little bit, I've stolen this phrase from other contexts. It's called surge capacity, where we're constantly having to find a bit extra, go a little bit further, do a little bit more, and everything is urgent. And when we're in that state all the time, we're actually in a heightened state of awareness. And not only are we exhausted from days where we're constantly in surge, it's having a toll on our mental state. So we're, you know, any of you who've done any work or study around neuroscience would know that it's adrenaline, cortisol are surging through our systems the whole time. So, and it related to learning, I have a real desire to see people have a lot more adaptive capacity. And so adaptive capacity is a little bit of space. So when change happens, I can take advantage of that opportunity, or take advantage of what opportunities that presents, that I have sufficient downtime built into my world that if I do need to do some just-in-time learning, I've got a bit of space for that. And so my recommendation, and there's a pile of studies, I won't cite them all now, but my recommendation is that we build in a 15% buffer. And so if you're thinking about this from a learning perspective, I'd be thinking making sure that we have at least just over an hour a day, or around 6 hours a week, that we don't book meetings in. That's space for us to do whatever thinking, breathing, living and working that we need to do. And I know for me, when I operate consistently at about 85% rather than 100, I and my clients as well experience it as well, they get way more done. So I'm just looking at the chat up here. Adaptive capacity, make sure your cup is half full. Ivan, you're right. In fact, when I fill up my teacup, I always fill it at around the 80 to 85%. And that's so when I walk, and it's a good metaphor, when I walk back from the kitchen, rather than having to walk really slowly and concentrate really hard on my tea to make sure I don't spill a drop, I can kind of strut back to my table, I can fling my cup around, I can have a conversation, and I don't spill any. But imagine if it's your head, right? If our head is so full, my favorite quote from David Allen, our brain is for having ideas, not storing them. And so that's part of what the overwhelm is. People are storing ideas, storing stuff. So if my head is full like my teacup, I have to tread slowly. It takes me a long time to do things. I have to concentrate really deeply. I just feel like I'm at risk at any moment of losing something, whether it's my temper because I have a short fuse, or information because it's lost. Oh gosh, the chat's gone off here. So I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to pause. I'll throw back to you now, Simon, and I'll have a quick look at what we've got here.
Yeah, have a look. I mean, it's spot on, isn't it? And it's this other thing when you then reflect on the fact that people are feeling that way. We start a session, we try to go, hey, we're going to learn something today. We've got to find ways to meet people where they are, don't we? We've got to find ways to acknowledge that, hey, this person's stressed out. How do I notice that? How do I recognize that? How do I acknowledge that? And how do I try and almost factor that in and put some kind of controls in place that help that person to feel kind of safe and that it's okay, if that makes sense. And I definitely see that as a trend a lot more in learning, particularly when you're looking at things like family violence, for example, and those sorts of content areas and areas that are potentially triggering. How do we care for the people who are on the receiving end of what we want them to learn, and make sure that we recognize that this is another form of that, that being at risk, and ensure that that safety is there. It's just really top of mind for me as we think about whatever experience it might be. Anyway, that's it.
I'm just looking at these gorgeous chat messages around, having space. Ivan reckons we need to have a 50% buffer. I'm like, okay, I'd love that. I don't know that I could sell that very well to corporates, that you want to give your people half the amount of time they're at work in a state of relaxation and thinking.
Donna, I reckon if you can bill your time 50% out, we'll all make bucket loads of money.
Yes, absolutely. If we bill ourselves that way, absolutely. I'm looking at people who are saying they spend time outdoors, and Mayor, I love this idea of kids' sports on weekends. It's an interesting reframe, isn't it? Because a lot of time we go, oh, I have to take my kids to sport on the weekend. But if we view it as, thank goodness it's downtime. And my recommendation for anyone that has to take the kids to sport, leave your phone in the car. Seriously, because the temptation to just look at your phone while the kids' soccer's on, then you're going to miss the goal. Little Johnny comes up and says, hey, Mum, did you see my goal? And you're like, oh, yes, of course I did. So really cool. Danielle, I love the idea that we've got an hour into our calendar as a meeting-free zone. Now, I'm going to just challenge that a little bit, because that you already should, because it's lunchtime. So congratulations, great step. That's when people should have lunch. I'm going to say find another hour. Like there you go. Woo, that's a bit challenging. Find another hour that they get no meeting times, because seriously, lunch is a given. Time to think. You shouldn't have to think, work, whatever over lunch as well. So capitalist economy, Monica, you're absolutely right. Got a lot to answer for. 70% products fine. In fact, there's been some studies done in the UK that would suggest we're only productive about 3 hours out of 8 a day. And by that is producing the stuff for which we are paid, or our KPIs, whatever you want to call it. And so the other 5 hours, who knows what we're doing? And so I'm a huge proponent, as Simon well knows, because this is what started this conversation, of the shortened work week, of a 32-hour work, same pay, 32 hours. Huge fan of that, because I just think that's kind of what we're doing now anyway. Similarly good. Look at this, lots of great stuff. Get a dog, Diana. I know if I say her name right now, she'll come here and downstairs, but dear Prudence is my black Labrador. She's been my saviour through all of this. These are all the things that, if we think about overwhelm, this is about decompression. This is about letting the pressure valve off and getting stuff out of our heads. And so whether it's a dog, or going to sport, or going for a walk, or having a rest, or taking some time out during the day, it is all about how we decompress and we make space so that our brains can think rather than store information. Now, as you can tell, this is a high horse that I get on, and I can ride this pony for quite some time. So
but it's good.
Back to you, Simon.
Yeah, but in summary of what you're saying, there's two lenses to look at this from, right? Isn't there? There's the self-management component, and we all feel responsible for our own behavior, our own planning, our own self-education on what is right for us. And I think sometimes we don't think about some of those little things that are important. And it's good to see things like, I know Jesse gets on his bike and that really helps him, going for a ride. My dog, little situations like that, taking them out to the river. Little things like that are the little ways that a person manages their own sort of mental state. The other part of that is, organizations and how they help people to do that as well. So there's obviously some onus on organizations to have things in place that are part of what they are putting into the structure of how we do work, but also into the learning that they create, and all those things. And what was interesting in the lead up to this conversation was putting out these surveys and asking people, what was it that we thought about digital overwhelm? How distracted did we feel? 42% of people said they were much more easily distracted than they'd ever been before. 32% of the same group said it's been a real struggle. And I would suggest that the people that said, when 11% of them said they still have quite a sharp focus, that's only 11% out of the whole amount that got surveyed. But I would suggest that those people probably have better self-management in place than those that didn't, if that makes sense. So what are we doing as organizations to support that, to help that to happen where it's not there, and to fortify it where it is, if that makes sense? And things like blocked out times in calendars, time off, ability to have shorter work weeks. Those are all really great things. I did get to see a lot of focus on less time at work and less doing and less stuff. And I think that's really, really important. But there is a harsh reality when it comes to certain roles and workloads and things that have to be learned and things that have to be achieved in a working week. And what I wouldn't like to see is doing all those things at the expense of the person's workload being completely unmanageable as a result. So it's got to be a bit of give and take, hasn't it? There's got to be a bit of understanding of, you know, what is the actual stuff that has to be done and can be achieved.
Absolutely. Look, and I know my time's up because I'm looking at the agenda and know we need to press on. But look, so I'm going to leave our learning and development professionals with a bit of a challenge. And I'm going to say, what would happen, or how would you make learning experiences a decompression? What would happen if people went, oh, great, I've got some learning and development on this afternoon. That's going to be a space for me to, you know, undo the top button of my jeans and relax a bit, to be able to take the time out, to be able to have a bit of breathing space and thinking space. What would happen if it looks like, because right now, I reckon a lot of people would see a learning and development piece in their calendar and they would go, oh, gee, I'm so flat out, I'm so booked out, and this is just going to create even more overwhelm for me. I think I might cancel that, or I might skip it, or I'll do the recording later, which no one ever does, just quietly. And although congratulations to you right now if you're actually watching this recording, thank you. But you get the idea. So what would happen if our L&D activities helped people decompress? That would be the challenge I would put down from a cognitive perspective. And back to you, Simon.